I assume we're starting right now. Kind of got my camera up high because I've been on a Zoom call with my writing critique group. And so, having somewhat of a decent clothes on, I thought I'd read you part of what I brought for my piece tonight. It's part of a novel that I'm writing. It's the second novel in a series that I hope to be a longer series featuring a character by the name of Benjamin Turner, and I call it a Benjamin Turner novel. And Benjamin is a former military police, uh, has started his own private detective agency, does quite well with it. And then one of the guys that we have in this story tonight is Don. They used to be military police together. Now Don, see, Benjamin's probably in his late 40s. Don is in his early 50s. They both are recently married for the very first time. They've been kind of living the high life. Uh, Don is married to a police officer, and they have two children. And Ben is married to a woman older than himself. They will never have children, which is fine with both of them. They neither one wanted them. But Benjamin and his wife, Verlene, he calls her headliner. You'll learn about that in the first novel as to why he calls her headliner. And they live in Nebraska. The first novel is Whitfield, Nebraska. And she doesn't know it, but she actually plays a pivotal role in a case he's working on. He doesn't know her either, how they meet. You just have to read it because it is fun. Um, but anyway, they have come out to North Georgia in a Hartwell, Georgia, which is in the northeast part of the state, which is where Don and his wife and children live. He is a police officer with the local force. So that's just a little bit of backstory. They get called out in the middle of the night because there's been a murder, as we knew it would be. This is the end part of a very short introduction to the two characters in this book. Ben is going to end up going into a deeper case later. Uh, that doesn't mean anything right this minute or not. So I thought you would enjoy what I read to them tonight. So that's what I'm going to do. It's it says it's one thing to sit in a pretty room drinking coffee, nibbling on cookies, and swigging whiskey while pretending to merely entertain temporary guests. It is quite another to have those guests show you the crime scene you yourself created. Don and I were not strangers to reactions from good people who, for the first, only, and last time in their lives, simply overreacted. We knew the signs. Though there are exceptions, most guilty people with no conscience often go to sleep when left alone in the midst of an interrogation. Perps know they did it and just hope that if they sit tight and keep their mouths shut while they wait on a lawyer, the police won't get enough evidence or find witnesses to convict. That does happen. Excuse me. Police know the perp did it and are fast putting together evidence so they can go in and tell the offender the story of how it went down. Well, surely, Ms. or Mr. Perp, don't you want to save your family embarrassment by getting it over with before the newspapers get hold of the story and screw it all up? See how helpful we are to your family? Though it has been known to happen, innocent people rarely sleep at such a time, and, unless they're just idiots, police usually know the person they're looking at is innocent of the crime itself, but could be making an error of judgment by protecting the guilty. So they play upon their good natures to do the right thing. It usually works. sometimes pretty fast. But a good person, having overreacted, is an animal of a whole other stripe. They can do one or more of several things. Appeal to the police by claiming shock, producing a momentary blindly raging madness that is not them. Truly, they swear. That is not like them at all. And or they dance around the subject pretending total ignorance of the end result of the overreaction. They shudder when presented with photos of the person they made dead, averting gazes with an astonished, "That wasn't me who did that," claim of innocence. But one thing they have no control over are their dead eyes, from which the joy of living has fled, and no amount of shocking will bring them back to life. The eyes never lie. Seasoned detectives know and always rely upon that to move forward quickly with their case, which is why Don and I knew Susan killed her husband as soon as she whistled through the front door, rubbing cold hands, wearing a torn party frock. We could explain away the torn dress. It happens. The smile was brilliant, voice confident, cheeks radiantly blushed, but her eyes lacked a matching joie de vivre. And now those two same dead eyes waited at the door to her bedroom. "Are you ready to go in, Susan?" I asked again. By way of answer, she shuddered, closed her eyes, and nodded. Then her shoulders squared and eyes opened. Don led the way in. In one hand, I held Don's assigned work phone, camera on, pointing at Susan. He held out his other in a sweeping motion. "Ladies first." We followed her into the room. "Mrs. Allison," Don said, pointing to the bed, "this is where we found your husband's body. We need you to tell us what happened. Can you do that?" Susan chuckled. She laughed, began swaying, patting her thigh on the 2 and the 4, and bobbing her head and shoulders to match the song she quietly began to sing. "Love you goodbye," was all she wrote. "I took the last train to Saint Tropez. I took the last train to Saint Tropez. I took the last train to Saint Tropez. I took the last train." She stopped singing and, looking at the camera, said, "I freely give this confession. I have not been coerced by threats or promises, though I expect my attorney will attempt to claim as much." She looked up and said, "Can you keep up?" I nodded. "Good. Here we go." Sam and I married 16 years ago, a match made in heaven. He had money and thought I was beautiful and remarkable and impressive. I needed financial support while I made a name for myself in the art world. We were born 2 hours apart on the same day in different cities. We both wanted children desperately. Never used birth control. My way. But after several miscarriages, she looked to Don, who nodded sympathetically. "You understand? Yes?" Very sad things miscarriages are, very sad. After the last one, Sam wasn't as understanding as he'd been in the past, and sex became without purpose, utilitarian, functional, habitual, barely. Susan snapped a quick laugh and shook her head. Fast forward in time to 2 years ago. Me, wondering what was happening with him, with our relationship. So last night when we got home from a party, well, he was colder than usual, you see, and I couldn't take the pressure of not knowing. She looked up, her eyes looking past the camera at me. Couldn't take it anymore. "Look, I admit I got overly zealous in trying to fix my marriage, and to do that I needed to know what was wrong. And to know what was wrong, I kept hounding him, and I wouldn't let him get away with fobbing me off with non-answers again." She screamed, her eyes turning hard. No more! He would answer me. We would be happy again, and we could. She looked at me and whispered, we could adopt. I told him so. We could rent a room. I didn't care how we got a child. We could do this if you'd only tell me what was wrong. Susan turned to the bed and shrugged. That's when he told me he'd already found a womb. One that worked properly, he said. One that would give him a child that would belong to him and his wife, he said. One that had already given him that child that was now 5 months old. And would I please sign papers and pack up and leave, he said. Her eyes blinked fast at the memory, tearless, and she went quiet. Don prodded her after a couple of minutes. Then what happened, Mrs. Allison? She whipped around to Don, pointed an authoritative finger, and snarled, do not call me Mrs. Allison. Okay. He paused, then softly spoke. Susan, then what happened? I went to the kitchen. She shrugged as if it was all self-evident and logical. And I got my favorite paring knife and I walked up the stairs. You walked up the stairs? Then what? Well, Detective Grace, I will tell you then what. Then I came up behind him and stuck it in his neck, his jugular to be more precise. We did not find the knife in the house. What did you do with it? She smiled and cut her eyes at the camera. You never told me how you found out he was dead. How'd you find out? Somebody called 911 and reported it. Who? I don't know yet. When I find out, do you want me to tell you? Yes, please. That would be kind of you. So, Susan, what did you do with the knife? It should be easy to find. There's a small body of water in the park, like a small pond or a deep cove at the lake, but it's right over there, she said, jerking a thumb in the general direction to search. And I threw it in. Susan, after you stabbed your husband in the neck, do you remember what happened before you left the house? What do you mean? After you stabbed your husband in the neck, what happened? He was sort of surprised. He started to fall back on the bed and tried to grab me to stop from falling, but he only got hold of my necklace and it broke. Where is it? It was taken in as evidence. Oh, right. Yes. I guess it would have been. Don pushed her harder. Susan, after he fell on the bed, what did you do? I twisted the knife in his neck. That's what I did. She doubled over, face and hands, moaning, what have I done? What have I done? Don patted her on the back. Thank you. I know that was hard. But we need to have you write this out by hand. Let's go to your office and let you do that, okay? 67 minutes later, the house was locked. She was handcuffed in the back of Don's car seat, in the back of Don's car, seated next to me, now holding the camera again, aimed at her. Her written confession laying on the front seat. Detective Grace? Detective Turner? Yes, Don said. I think I might have overreacted a bit. Don't you think? We nodded grimly. You see the problem. As heads indicated negatory, I spoke for us both. Can you explain that? Of course. I am an artist. My artistic eye immediately noticed a recent addition of certain elements in the room, tones I would not have chosen. Browns, you see. Do not go with the carefully selected shades of white. She paused. What I mean is, those colors conflict with the warm whites of the carpets, bedclothes, and curtains. You see? And they definitely don't go with the cool whites of the furniture and the window and the door trim. Completely clashing. She tried to raise a finger on point, but handcuffs stayed the movement. Now, unlike the sensitively chosen and precisely placed urns and baskets with their accents of warm blue purples and deep blue grays, the recently added colors, varying as they did from light brown to kind of a dark reddish chocolate, their position helter-skelter. They scream for attention. And those black smudges throughout, what were they? Fingerprint powder, Dawn answered. Clearly, her artistic soul was more offended by those than the bloody outline of where her husband's head and neck had lain. She frowned. It's everywhere. And not even randomly placed, very precise, only on doors and... In her mind, she examined the room again. Handles and dresser. Her voice faded and she shook her head. Still, not all art is pretty. Then her face lit with joy. Don't you see? You do, don't you? We did not. Even death is art. Well, I thought, whatever helps you through the night, lady. And so that's just one chapter. Okay. You might like watching this if it's snowy tomorrow and cold and you can't get out.